So, you want to learn Unreal Engine 5? Well, you're in the right place. In this video, I'll teach you everything you need to know to jump into the world of Unreal and start creating fast. I'll be teaching you the basics of Unreal Engine, how to create your first level, creating a road using a spline, Unreal Engine's foliage system, how to add static meshes via Fab, placing decals, basic lighting, a camera sequencer deep dive, and how to render your Unreal cinematic. I also have a Discord channel linked below. Welcome to all. So if you want to share your render or ask for help, feel free to check it out. And lastly, I also have a membership for anyone willing to support that includes a member title as well as priority replies for any comments. So with that, let's jump into it. First things first, we need to download Unreal Engine. To do that, go over to unrealengine.com, and on the homepage, you're going to see Get Unreal. Click that button. Once you click that button, it's going to take you to this tab where it tells you the different steps. The first one being download the launcher. And then from there, you can install the Epic Games launcher and then finally install Unreal Engine. So go over here to the launcher and download it to get the Epic Games launcher. UnrealEngine.com is also very helpful because it has a documentation and learning tab that will teach you a bunch of different things about Unreal Engine without having to go throughout YouTube. A lot of this stuff is connected to game design as well as cinematics, so I highly suggest you check this out. Once you download the Epic Launcher and open it up, this is what you're going to see, and you have an Unreal tab right here. This has 6 other tabs, one being News, Samples, which is very helpful when it comes to learning new information as well as playing around in new projects, Fab, which is the new marketplace for a bunch of different digital content, and the Library. Twinmotion and reality capture, I'm not really going to go over since they don't really pertain to what we're learning today. However, in the Library tab, you can go over to Engine Versions, click Plus, and here you can also add in any engine version that Unreal Engine has. However, I do suggest you download 5.5.2, which is the current engine out right now as of the making of this tutorial. Just below, you'll also see My Projects, which are a list of all the projects you have created in Unreal Engine. And below that, you'll also have your Fab library. I'm not sure if this still populates, considering everything has moved over to Fab. However, if you have historically used Quixel Bridge before it moved over to Fab, or anything throughout the Epic Marketplace, it will pop up here. Okay, so now let's get into launching our project. Now that I have 5.5.2 downloaded, I'm just going to click Launch. Okay, and this is the Unreal Project Browser. So from here, you'll have Recent Projects tab on the top left, which will show you all the recent projects you have created. And then below that will be all different presets. The games preset will have a blank, first person, third person, top down, handheld AR, virtual reality, and vehicle template. These different templates have different setups already created within them that you can take advantage of. So for example, third person, if you open this project and click play, you'll be already playing in the third person with your character. Whereas first person will show what you see here, where it'll be first person with a gun. So you can always use these different presets whenever you're creating something specific. So if you want to create a game that's third person, you're already kind of ahead of the game. The next one is film and video events. Again, there's another blank project, as well as virtual production, DMX, in-camera VFX, motion design, and in-display. Virtual production is usually helpful when you are doing a virtual camera setup or handheld camera setup mixed with reality. If you want a good idea of what this is used for, it's usually a Disney or Mandalorian production with some sort of screen behind the actor. Motion design is something newly released within Unreal, which allows you to do real-time motion design inside Unreal Engine. Architecture is another one for ArcViz, design configurator, collab viewer, as well as handheld AR. And lastly, we have automotive for photo studio, product configuration, collab viewer, and handheld AR. Now, what I normally use is third person because by using third person, I automatically get the mannequin within my project, which is going to let me set up the mannequin as a size reference, which is incredibly helpful when creating within Unreal Engine. So I'm going to click on the third person. I'm going to go over to the project location, click on this little browse folder and pick the project location. And then I'm going to name the project. The last thing I want you to do before you create your project is to go over to starter content and click the check. And then click create. Okay, and now we're inside Unreal Engine. So the first thing I'm going to teach you is how to move around your level. So if you right click on your mouse and move your mouse around, it's going to let you look around from the position you're currently set in. To move from your position, use the WASD keys to go forward, backward, and then strafe right and strafe left. The next thing is clicking Q to go down and E to go up. And by mixing these keys together, you can then move around your scene pretty seamlessly. The next thing I want to note is if you hold right click and scroll up on your wheel, it will increase the speed in which you move throughout your world. So if you look up here in the top right on camera speed, while I'm holding the right click and scrolling down, you'll see that the numbers are decreasing. And then if I scroll up, you'll see the numbers increase. So what's happening here is the camera speed is changing. So if I go up to 7 and click W to go forward, I shoot forward. And now if I go back, I shoot back. However, if I scroll down and move forward, you're not even noticing that I'm moving forward. And then I can easily just scroll forward while holding W to increase and decrease the speed accordingly, which is very helpful when it comes to moving around your scene. The next thing I want to note is the simple File, Edit, Window, Tools, Build, Select, Actor, and Help. Inside File, you can make a new level, open a new level, favoritize levels, as well as open different assets, save, export, and create new projects. Very similar to other file menus in other programs. The next one is Edit. Edit is mainly going to be helpful because you're going to be using the project settings as well as the plugins tab quite often throughout using Unreal Engine. The plugins tab is going to let you enable or disable certain plugins throughout your project. And the project settings tab is going to let you adjust settings inside your project. For example, if you want to enable ray tracing or substrate materials, this is where you'd be doing it. Next is Window, which is going to help you create or add different things to your view. For example, you can add in cinematics, or open your content browser, or use your outliner, as well as partition and virtual production. For example, this is your outliner. So if you delete your outliner and your details, you can go over to Window, go over to Outliner, click 1 to bring those back, go over to Window again, go to Details, click 1, and now your details are back as well. Next is Tools. This is going to help you mainly when it comes to game design within Unreal Engine. Since this tutorial is more focused on cinematics, I would say this tab will not be used. The Build tab is useful when it comes to building different materials, static meshes, or levels to generate lighting as well as streaming data. Next is Select, which is pretty self-explanatory and not often used. And lastly is the Actor, which lets you adjust asset options, view options, and actor options. Here on the far left is your Save button. And this drop-down menu is going to let you enter different activation modes. So the first one is Selection, which is very simple, lets you select different objects. Landscape mode will help you create landscape as well as paint it. Foliage mode will help you add in foliage. Mesh paint mode will help you paint your meshes. Modeling mode will help you model different meshes. Fracture mode will let you destroy objects by fracturing them, as well as brush editing and animation. Animation mode will also help you animate your characters. So going back over to selection mode, the next thing I'm going to look at is this plus with the box. If you click on this, it is mainly to help you open different place actors. Place actors can be anything from a character to lights for your scene, shapes for your scene, cameras as well as rigs and rails, a media plate, visual effects, geometry, volumes, and more. This is mainly very helpful when it comes to quickly adding different things to your project. The next one that we use often is right here, which is the level sequence and add level sequence within shots. To actually create your cinematic, you'll be using a level sequence later on, so I'll dive deeper into this later. After that is your play button. If you click play, since we're in third person, you're automatically going to be given a third person character, and you can move your character very similarly to how you would in a video game with the WASD keys. as well as looking around, holding on to the right of your mouse to look left and right. To exit out, since now your mouse is stuck on your character, all you need to do is click escape, and you will now be moved out of game mode. Now to go over the viewport. Right here, you'll be able to change different stats throughout your viewport when it comes to game view, immersive mode, allow camera shakes, multiple things like that, as well as FOV. Next, you have perspective mode, which is showing the perspective of the camera. Top, bottom, left, right are all very helpful when it comes to adjusting different meshes. So right now, if I click on these meshes, I can now use them perfectly to the grid and then look at them on the bottom as well as the left and the right. I would generally use this when it comes to modeling. Go back to perspective. The next are different lighting modes. I can go unlit, which is removing all light from the scene. I can go over to wireframe mode. I can go to lit wireframe mode, detail lighting, lighting only, reflections, and so on. Lit mode is mostly helpful when it comes to representing your scene accurately, and unlit mode is very helpful when it comes to actually coloring your scene, since it is very easy to adjust things color-wise when light is not at play. Lastly is the show menu, which will show different objects within your scene. Now, if we move here over to the right, these are different selection options. So the first one is to select an object. Next one is to transplant an object, rotate an object, and scale an object. Another way of handling this is actually clicking on your object and using the hotkeys W, E, and R. W will let you move up and down the location of your object. E will let you change the rotation of your object, and R will let you change the size of your object. If you couldn't tell by what I'm doing right now, you can also change these by using the different dongles in a row. If you would like to move them all freely at the same time, you can click on the exact middle to move it fully, or you can click on one or the other to unlock the X and Y axis, or the X and Z axis, and so on. The same setup works for rotation and scale as well. If you would like to rotate, you can. And scale, you can also use the middle to scale the object uniformly. Or if you only click on the X and Y, you will only scale X and Y without scaling the Z axis. Next is going over to the gizmo and making sure it is connected to worldview. So if I turn this object, move it upwards, and spin it to the side, the gizmo is going to stay normal. Or if I click on it, it'll say relative to the object. So clicking this button will adjust between the two. Next, we have a lock on the grid, rotation, and scale. So if I go over here to this box and I want to go up, it will go up by an increment of 10, which is labeled right here. So if I go up, it'll go up by 10. But say I don't want to go up by 10. If I click this button right here and now move our object, you're going to see it does not go by increments of 10. It will go slowly by however I move it, which means it is freeing it from the lock. And the same process works for the other two as well. If I switch this over to rotation, it is rotating by increments of 10, denoted on the actual dongle itself. Now, if I go over here to click and disable it, you're now going to see it is not locked by increments of 10. Same thing with size. The next, you have the viewports. If you would like to view your scene using different ways, you can. You can go over here and change to lighting only. So you can view your scene from a top-down perspective, lighting only, as well as detail lighting on one end and leaving it perspective. This way you can view your scene at once using multiple different ways of handling things, which is very helpful when it comes to modeling, and or setting up your scene. To switch your scene back to 1, all you have to do is click right here, and now your scene will move back to just 1 viewport. Next is the outliner. The outliner is showing you everything that is in your scene currently. You can organize this using different folders or just let things sit out. I will suggest organization is always best. Next is the details panel. So when we click on our box right here, you will see different details about your box shown up in the details panel. If you want, you can slim things down to just a general, actor, LOD, MISC, physics, rendering, streaming, or all. I usually suggest all. However, if you do know what you want, you can always click on the specific menu that has the specific object or parameter that you want to adjust. Here, you can play with the location as well as the rotation and scale. You can change the mobility, which actually affects the bake lighting and how fast it renders. You can adjust the static mesh as well as material. So if you would like to add in a different material, you can add in a different material. And then you can also change the physics and collision of your object. These settings change depending on the object you click on. For example, if I go over here to the box with the plus sign, go down to cinematic and click Cinecamera Actor and bring our actor in, now you're going to see on the right that the transform and mobility is still there. However, the details change. So for the camera, the details are focused on the film back, the lens setting, the focus, the crop, as well as many other camera focused settings. Okay, and lastly is our content browser. So if you click Control Space on your keyboard, it's going to bring up your content browser, which is what houses all the information and assets you have available to you within your Unreal Engine project. The content browser is very helpful because it lets you add different presets and assets, as well as let you enter fab, import new assets, as well as save. You can also right-click throughout your content browser to add in more assets, and you can create different folders within your content browser to help organize your scene. Lastly is the filters. You probably have this blank since you haven't used any filters. However, if you want to add filters here, all you need to do is click right here on the drop-down menu and add a new filter for what you're looking for. I would say in most cases, static mesh, texture, level, skeletal mesh, and material are used the most often. However, for example, if I wanted to look for a Niagara system, I can click check right here. And now in the filters area, you're going to see Niagara system is shown. If I unclick it, now the filter is gone and everything comes back. If I click static mesh, it is now going to show me and filter for all the static meshes within our content folder. And if I unclick static mesh, it will not filter for anything. Okay, so now that we have a basic understanding of how Unreal Engine works, the next thing we can do is create our first level. So to do that, I'm going to have you right click and go over to level. And I'm going to name this intro tut. However, you can name the scene whatever you want. After I'm done doing that, I'm just going to click outside of the box and then double click on the level to open it up. Okay, and here's our first level. As you're going to see, it is completely black. The reason it's completely black is because nothing is actually brought into our level. There's no lighting, there's no sky, there's no atmosphere, and there's no landscape. So the first thing we need to do is add in our environment. To do that, go over to Window, go down to Environment Light Mixer, and click Create Skylight, Create Directional Light, Create Sky Atmosphere, Create Volumetric Cloud, and Create Height Fog. This is the basis of how Unreal Engine creates its entire atmosphere. The next thing I'm going to have you do is go over to the plus sign and type in Environment. This is going to add in a folder, and now we can move everything we just added in into the environment folder to keep things organized. Okay, and now let's create our landscape. So to do that, I'm going to go over here to selection mode, click on it, and go down to landscape. And now if I move upwards, you're going to see a whole green box right here, which is where our landscape is going to be. So all I need to do is click create. And now we have a landscape. Next, I can switch over to selection mode. And I want to create my road. So to do that, I'm going to go over to our selection mode and switch to modeling. And I'm going to click on rectangle and drag and drop a rectangle in. Now, if I click on this little top bar, it works the same as the location gizmo, and I can scroll up or move it up. And then I'm going to just make the subdivisions to be 50 and 50. After that, I'm going to click accept. Now I'm going to go back to selection mode and go to Fab to grab our first assets. So I'm going to go over to Window and head down to Fab. And within Fab, if you aren't able to find Quixel right away, you can type something in such as grass. And whenever you see these domes, they're usually Quixel, but these actually right here are as well. What we're looking for is this little Q for Quixel. Just click on that so you can make it over to the Quixel library. Once you're in the Quixel library, I'm just going to type in American Road. And we have a bunch of road assets here. I want to use Define American Road. So I'm going to click here and I can change the overall quality to whatever I want, raw, high, medium, and low. I'm just going to bring in raw quality and add to our project. If you have a computer that you don't trust as much or feel is running slow, make sure to pick lower qualities. Once you click add to the project, you'll see it downloading on the bottom right and then importing, so you know you have it. Now, if I do control space, I can bring up Fab and go to Megascans, Services, find American, Raw, and I'm just going to grab the material instance, click on the static mesh, and then go down here to materials to this little plus sign under element and click right here. And now we have added on our road. The next thing I'm going to do is go over here to selection mode and go back to landscape. Now, once we're in landscape, I'm going to go over to manage and then down to spline. So we're going to create a spline that our road can exist on. So next we can go over to layers, click on the layer and just add a layer, click landscape, edit layer and select. Now I can right click on the layer and rename this road. And now that I'm holding on to the layer, I can scroll back to a location I feel is good and click Control, left click. And you're going to see this gizmo pop up. Now, from here on out, all I'm going to do is Control, left click in equal spaces down our scene. If we feel we want to add something on the back end, all we need to do is click on the last gizmo, turn around, and do the same thing again. Shift and click in even spaces. Now that our landscape is in, or now that our spline is in, I'm going to click on any of these little mountain symbols and then go over to Update Spline Mesh Levels. Once I do that, I can go down to Landscape Spline Mesh and click a plus sign and then drop down the index. Now that we have a mesh, I'm going to go over here to our mesh and find the rectangle that we just created and add it. Now you're going to see that the rectangle is currently empty. What we need to do is do Control Space and go into our generated folder. Since we just generated a model, the only thing in our generated folder will be the rectangle static mesh. So I'm going to now click on this to bring it up. And then when I see World Grid Materials, I can just click down and find our road material. Right here, I'm just going to type in American, get the instance, and add it on. Now, the first thing you're going to notice is our material is not lined up correctly. However, we can change this, and we change this by actually adjusting the material on our original static mesh. So to do that, all we need to do is go back to where our static mesh is, double click on it, and this will be our static mesh, and this is our material. So now we can double click on our material, and then the last place is go to the parent and double click. Now, this is our material. It is currently being linked via Albedo channels. And if you actually double click on any of these, it'll bring you to where all the parameters that reach it are existing. So say if I want to see where all the normal information is, I can just click on normal, and this is our grid right here. Now, Where we want to go to is this UV channel. If I double click this UV channel, it's going to take us over to this one, which is the heart of what is going on. UVs in Unreal Engine are how our material is going to lay on our static mesh. So by adjusting the actual UVs, we will adjust the way our material looks on our static mesh. So what I need you to do is first grab everything that is to the left of UVs. Again, what you have is different from mine, but just follow along and delete everything to the left of the UV. So now you and I are all equal. All we have is our UV node. Now, the first thing I'm going to want you to do is right click and type in rotator and find custom rotator under miscellaneous. Now you can take the rotated values and plug it into UV. Now we need our texture coordinate. So from here, I'm going to right click and type in texture and then COO, and under coordinates, you're going to find texture coordinate. I'm going to click on that. Next, we need a multiply node. Now, if you want, you can right click and type in multiply. But the other option is this particular node, since it's used often, has its own hotkey. So to use the hotkey, all you need to do is hold M and left click. And now you have a multiply node. The next thing we're going to need is an append node. So I'm going to right click and type in EPPEND. And what we want is our math append vector. The append node is going to help us connect two different values. In this case, the U and V values. So the next thing we need is a parameter value. To bring in a parameter value, again, it's used often, so we can use S and left click for the hotkey. If you keep holding S, you're going to get what I get, where you type in S right away. So I'm going to delete those S's and name this parameter U. The next one I'm going to bring in is another parameter node. So I'm going to S click and delete parameter and type in V. Now, first thing I'm going to do is make both the default values 1. And then I'm going to plug the U into A and the V into B. And then from here, I can plug the append into multiply and the texture coordinate into multiply. And then from here, it goes into the UVs. The U and the V are going to help us adjust the X and Y values of our actual material. So we can move and adjust it from an X and Y perspective. The next thing we need to add in is how we can actually rotate our material. So to be able to do that, what we need to type in is right click and type in vector 2. Actually, I apologize. Do constant to vector right here. Now for the X value, I'm going to do 0.5 and the Y value, I'm going to do 0.5. And then lastly, it's our rotator value. I'm going to click S and type in rotator and name you or give you a value of 1 and plug the rotator angle. And then our vector 2 constant can go into rotation center. And then from here, the UVs are already plugged into all the UVs. So all we need to do is go over to apply and save. Now, once we do that, I can exit out of all our materials, go back to our spline. So make sure our spline is chosen. If you don't see your spline coming up, just go over here to update spline mesh levels, and it'll be under landscape spline meshes. Now I'm going to double click back into the mesh, double click into our material. And now this is our material instance window. Now, if I go down to the global scalar parameters, I can minimize, turn on the rotator, and if I type in 1.2, they will have adjusted. So now all we need to do is find the exact middle for this material. I'm going to try 1.25 and save. So now our material is facing the right direction. The next thing we can do is our material, or rather our spline, is currently sunken into our landscape. So we need to adjust that just slightly so it is higher than our landscape. To do that, I'm going to again click on any of these mountain symbols and go over to control points. Now I can go down to mesh vertical offset and click 0.2. So if I scroll all the way down, you're going to see it's just barely sitting above our landscape, which is exactly what we want. And if I click out, I can then zoom in to make sure that our material is connecting as we go, which it is, which means we've also typed in our rotation correctly. Now, the next thing we need to do is adjust the actual size of the road and make sure it's appropriate to what you would expect a road to be. So what we can do is switch over to selection mode, click Control Space to bring up the content browser, and go over to content. And from content, you can type in the search bar, MANN, and this is going to bring in our mannequin. In the very beginning of this tutorial, I said I like using third person because it comes with a mannequin. This is what I am talking about. If you have not listened to me and you did not start with a third person and you do not have a mannequin, you can add it by going over here to add feature or content pack, and clicking any of these. Third person will give you the mannequin, and then add to your project. Now that you have your mannequin, I'm going to do Control Space and just drag and drop our mannequin onto our road and turn him the right direction. Now, since our mannequin is life-sized, you can see that using the size reference, the road is much larger than it should be. So to fix that, we can go back over to landscape mode, click on any of these mountain symbols, go over to control points, and go down to half width, which is going to half the width for each 1,000. So if I type in 500, we are halving it. And now our road is much more appropriate for the size of our human. So with that, I can now go over to selection and move out of our spline settings. The next thing we can do is bring in some assets to help fill up our scene. So to do that, go over to Window and click on Fab. Now, the first thing we want to do is go to the Quixel library. So if you don't see Quixel right here to be able to enter the Quixel library, again, you can search whatever you want, in my case, grass, to find the Quixel library, which is denoted with this Q. So I'm going to click on the Q, and now I am in the Quixel library. So the first thing I want to do is bring in some ledges and some mossy corners to kind of fill in the left and right of our actual road. So I'm going to type in mossy correctly. And now I have a bunch of different mossy rocks, embankments, and things like that. So what I'm going to do is start selecting them and adding them to my project. Again, if you're not too comfortable with the specifications of your computer, please use medium or low quality. After you select your quality, you can click Add to Project. If your quality is already selected correctly, all you need to do is actually hold on whatever you wish to download and drag your mouse down. So in my case, I'm just left clicking and dragging down to download the assets that I want to use in my scene. Now, after going through all the mossy objects, I'm going to delete and type in Nordic. From here, I'm just going to keep scrolling down and finding all the assets that I would like to use and grabbing them. Once you're done downloading all of those, the next I'm going to do is delete that and type in black alder. And it's going to bring me to this asset pack right here. And all you need to do is click Add to Project. If it asks you which project to choose, just go down and click the most recent project, which is 5.3, and add to your project. Now that our assets are downloaded, all we need to do is exit out of Fab. Okay, the next thing we can do is start setting up our shot to make sure we're only creating for what is going to be within our scene. So I'm going to click on our mannequin and just move him up the road a bit. And then I'm going to go over here to the box with the plus sign, click on that, and go down to Cinematic and click Cine Camera Actor. Now, if I go over here to the details or the outliner and right click Cine Camera Actor, I can go down to Pilot. So now when I move my screen, it is moving how the camera is viewing the world. So I'm going to right click, scroll down to make it go slower, and I'm going to click Q to just bring it lower to the ground and back it up a bit. Now, once I'm here, I can go over to the settings. So I'm going to go to film back and switch this over to DSLR, which is going to increase the sensor width, which is then going to show more of your scene. And then I'm going to take it and maybe make you 28. And I think those are all the changes I want to make. And maybe just line up right here. Now, I do want to say if your computer is on the weaker end, definitely shorten your scene up so you will require less assets. The less assets in your scene, the less memory it takes up. So now that our camera is set up, I'm going to go over here to the top left and click this little export symbol. And now we're out of our camera. So the next thing I'm going to do is actually just grab the mannequin, since I like having the mannequin in our scene, and just move it in front of our camera. And then move it forward. And there we go. So now if you click on your camera, you're going to see this image pop up. And there's a little pin on the bottom left of the image. If you click that pin, now if you click out of the camera, the image is still there. So now we can start adding in our assets now that we know what is going to be in and out of our scene. So I'm going to start right here, do Control Space to bring up our content browser. And I'm going to go over to our Fab folder. And once I'm in the Fab folder, I'm just going to filter for static mesh. Again, if you don't have the filter, you can go up right here and click static mesh to get the filter. It'll pop up and click on it. Make sure you're on the Fab library. If you are, all the assets you downloaded that are static meshes should now appear. First thing I'm going to do is just bring them all into our scene to kind of see what I have to work with. So this is going to be the size of our road. Now, the first thing I need to teach you is how to copy and move quickly. So to copy something, all you need to do is do Command or Alt, click on the location dongle and move it. And now there's going to be a new static mesh created. This is going to help us move pretty quickly. The next thing I do want to teach you is how to keep your camera on the static mesh when you move it, which is holding Shift. And now when I move, my camera is following the static mesh, which is also very helpful when you're moving things around. So I'm going to start off by just creating a little piece right here of how the side of our road is going to look. And then once you all can kind of watch and see how I do it, I will then speed through the rest. So to start off, I'm going to use this, our largest piece, and kind of move it right here and enlarge it. I can move it back just a bit. Then just to make sure we don't have any extra static meshes, I'll just move those. So I have this piece right here, and I can turn you around and make you larger. Kind of bring you in to our scene. Like this. I can bring you lower. And then enlarge you. And there we go. We now have a nice little bank to our scene. Now you can add in any extra that you feel you would like to kind of expand on the overall look of your scene. So there's any rocks you want kind of hidden in. If you feel like you can see the ground, all that works. I do want to note that we will be putting a material on this ground. So if you do have gray peeking through, like you see right here, I wouldn't worry about it too much because we will hide it later in. One last thing I do want to note, you can also click on multiple static meshes. So if I click on one and now shift click throughout the rest to grab all the ones we just used, I can now do Command Alt to copy and kind of move down. This is a good wholesale approach to kind of getting this side of your road quickly. We do want to switch these up so it's not all the same, but it's nice to have all the assets there, and then you can kind of twist and turn depending on what you still want. Okay, so let's get to making it. Okay, so now that we're done with the left side, we can start adding in some trees before we start on the right side. So to do that, I'm going to do Control Space. And now I'm going to go over to Black Alder, and I'm going to pick all the trees that seem to be bushy on the bottom and put them in the background. That way, it kind of blocks our scene, and I don't need to be creating things behind the trees to make it have depth. So I'm going to grab this tree, and this tree. And now I'm just going to start spreading this tree around in the background, block out the back of our scene. And now that they're all placed, the next thing you want to do, just to make sure there's like some variety in the background, is just go through and rotate some of the trees so they're not all lined up on the exact same axis. Okay, the next thing we can do is bring in our taller trees, which can be seen right here, and start adding those in. Okay, so now that we have a good variety of trees selected, I am now going to place these throughout our scene as well. Okay, now same thing. Now that all the trees are placed, I'm going to go through and just switch up the rotation for them so they're not all looking lined up. Okay, so now that we're done adding in all these assets, the next thing I want to do is bring in a landscape material so we can fully visualize what it's going to look like. So to do that, I'm going to go over to Window and go back to Fab. Once I'm in Fab, I'm just going to type in grass so we can get something to pop up quickly to find our Quixel library right here. So now I'm going to click RQ. And from there, I'm going to now type in forest floor. And I'm just looking for a forest floor with nothing too special to it, just something plain to kind of add in to fill in the gaps. This looks like it'll do. So I'm going to take this one, pick whichever quality you want, and add to the project. If this pops up, just click accept. All right, so now that your material is added, it'll pop up right here. However, if it does not pop up, you can click out. I'm going to do Control Space, and I want to filter for my materials. So if I click on the Fab library, I can filter right here for material instance. Again, if you don't have yours, these are all in here. This one will be found under material. So if you go to material and then go to the right, you're going to see material instance. If you click that, the filter will pop up. So now filtering back from material instance, these are all our materials. And this is what we're trying to add to our ground. So I'm going to click right here, click on our landscape. And then on the right, I can go under landscape material and click the arrow, which is going to add in the last used material. Now, my only comment to this is it is a little small. So all I want to do is double click on the material, go over to the global scalar parameter values, which is what we added in earlier. And I'm going to click on the U and the V and make it 0.2 and 0.2, which is just going to enlarge the material and make it blend much better. Okay, so now that that is added in, the next step is doing the right side of our scene. All right, now that we're done putting in the trees, the next thing we can do is go into Fab and bring in the rest of the assets we're going to use to finish out the scene. So I'm going to go over here to Window and go down to Fab. And then once I'm in Fab, I'm going to go over here to the Quixel library. Once I'm in the Quixel library, I'm going to type in road. And once you do this, if you actually filter for 3D models, you're going to get a bunch of different assets that we can use for our scene. Now, the first ones I'm going to download as I go down is this concrete rubble pile. The next ones are the asphalt rubble. And as we continue down, I'm going to grab the metal barricade. The construction barrels, traffic cone, you can do the traffic delineator post. Okay, so now that we downloaded all those 3D models, next thing we can do is also download some decals. So I'm going to click over here on decals, and then I can go up to the top and just type in road, which would give me some like road cracks and debris. I'm going to go for the road cracks and start downloading some of these. So I'll do this road right here. Road damage. And then this road damage as well. Add it to my project. And then now that, and this asphalt crack. Now that I've downloaded those, the next we can do is actually go back into the Quixel library to all products. And then now I'm going to go back into 3D models, and I'm just going to type in weeds. For some reason, the Quixel library seems to be giving me issues. If this happens to you, I'm just going to exit out and then go back into the Quixel library. And now I'll do the same thing. So I'll just click 3D models and then type in weeds. And you can get this curbside weed pack right here and add that to your project as well. Next thing we do is just go to the overall library and type in car into the search bar. You can also go over here to the right and filter. So for price, I'm just going to filter for free. And I'm looking for a damaged or abandoned car that looks good. Maybe we can do this burned out car right here. So I'm going to take this one and add this to our project. And then the next one we want are some road signs. Now there's a bunch of roadsides here, but I'm going to be, again, going over to price and filtering for free. I'm going to use this road sign pack right here, add this to my project. Maybe if I'm feeling this one would work, I'll add this to my project as well, this police road sign. And then I also want to use some dead leaves for our scene as well. So you can find this in the Quixel library under dead leaves. Add this to your project too. And then I think we are good to go. So now that we have all the assets downloaded, I'm just going to exit out of Fab. So the first thing we can do is do Control Space, click on Fab, and then filter for static meshes to bring up our entire library of newly grabbed static meshes. So the first thing I'm going to notice is if I bring in our roadside pack, it is going to show all of the static meshes, which is not what we want. We would want these to be separated. The next one is also the burned car. If I drag that in, everything got very dark because if I zoom out, we have two gigantic cars in our scene. So the first thing we do is use the cars and slim those down as much as possible. And then zoom back in. This is also where our mannequin comes in handy, is we can use our mannequin as a size reference. I think it's still slight. Nope, it's going maybe a little bigger. I think that's a good size. Perfect. And we can drag you back here. Now, what we need to do is separate the meshes so we can use these signs appropriately. So the first thing I'm going to do is click on the actual signs. I'm going to go up here to selection mode on the top left, click on it, and go down to modeling. Within modeling, I can go over to model and click plane cut. And the second I click on that, you're going to notice that this plane pops up and everything above it is gone and below it is there. So what we need to do is adjust it so it shows exactly what we want. So right now, I would like to have the speed limit sign. So I'm going to bring it over here and click cut. Then if I bring it over here and then move it back. Oh, I think I clipped it a bit. So we can cancel. If that happens, if you make any mistake, just click cancel. Go back into the plane cut, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. Move it over here and click cut. And then I can move it over here and flip it. Make sure it's not cutting of anything that I want, and click accept. And there we go. We now have one single I guess, speed limit. But the other issue is now if I try and move it, its pivot point is right here. So we also need to switch the pivot point to make things a little easier on us. To do that, keep clicking on the mesh, and then you can go over here to mesh. I lied. You can go over here to X form, click edit pivot, and then click center and click accept. So now it is centered on our mesh. And then now that we have our sign, I'm going to hold shift, hold over here, and pull and drop our sign in our scene. So we have a nice speed limit in our scene. Next we can do is same thing with the car. By looking at the car, I think I want to use the right one. So I am now going to do the exact same thing. Go over to mesh, or sorry, model, click plane cut, spin it. So we're cutting the correct car and click accept. And then I can go over to, click on it, go over to X form, edit pivot, center, accept. And now I will drag you down our scene as well. Kind of spin you. So you're a little off kilter. And also kind of move you so it looks like you moved off our scene slightly. Perfect. So that's looking good. Next thing we can do is do control space to bring up our rubble and bring that into our scene. So we have kind of some rubble off onto the side. Then I can even open this up and put some cones out. So I'll do 1, 2, and 3. Kind of drag you up and drop you and spin you. And then you can always get close to your object to make sure it's laying appropriately on your scene. Perfect. That's looking good. Okay, so now that we brought those assets in, the next thing I want to do is add some decals throughout our scene to kind of roughen up our asphalt. So if you go over to Fab, go into Megascans, and then click decals, you can find your decals here. Unfortunately, there isn't really a way to filter for just decals. If you filter, you'll filter for the material instance. But in this case, if you just go over to decals within your folder, you'll have all your decals labeled out. And then you can just drag and drop your decal into your scene and on whatever surface you want your decal to be on. So I'm just going to slowly rough up our scene just slightly by adding in decals throughout. I will say if you have any issue with the decal on your scene, you can always flip or turn them. Sometimes if you use them on the back half, you'll see that they are black like you see here. So if that happens to you, just rotate it so it is sitting on the correct side. If it's on the back side of it, it most likely is the cause for why it would look the way it looks. So now we have sufficiently roughed up our road. The next thing we can do is actually change the color of our rubble to kind of fit the road so it looks like it's meant to be there. So if you want, you can always switch over to unlit. Unlit won't let light affect the way the color is perceived, which means when you want to adjust the color of an object, it's most likely best to do this in unlit mode. And then you can click on the actual object, go over here to the right to the material and double click there. And you'll have these settings pop up. So base color is where we want to hang out. We can always go over here to brightness and reduce the brightness so it kind of fits a little better. You can also adjust the color factor if you feel like the color isn't as accurate as it could be. Make small adjustments here to all these colors to make a large effect. So you don't really need to adjust too much for it to start turning red or some other color. And then I'm just going to bring down the brightness a little more. And now if I save and go back to lit mode, you're going to see it looks a lot more appropriate for what it is on. So unlit mode is a really good place to kind of make these adjustments. So again, I'm going to click on it just to see what I made. So brightness is reduced to 0.376, and then we have red around 0.96, green around 0.01, and then 0.95. So I'm going to click on this one and make the same changes. I can go over here, kind of reduce U. Then I'm just going to add probably a little green, or blue's probably the better color. There we go. So 0.416, 0.102, and 0.99. Save, and then go back to lit. And now our rubble is fitting our scene much better than it was earlier. Now I can go back over here to our camera, delete our mannequin so we can start getting a clearer view of our scene, and look at our pilot and move it up a bit so we can kind of frame our scene a bit better. And this is what we're looking like. Next thing we can do is also add some organization. You can organize this however you want. I do a very simple organization strategy, which is just environment, objects, cinematics. So I'm going to grab the cinematic folder and move it out so it's in its own, it's in the main section. And then I'm going to go over here and grab all of our objects we have just placed and move these into one giant folder. And then for the burned out car, I will also move that over into objects. Landscape can go over to objects. And then our cine camera actor is camera actor, and our environment is in the environment. The next thing we can do is start adding in some foliage. So to do that, I can go over here to the top left, click on selection mode, and go down to foliage mode. So within foliage mode, if I do control space, I go back over to fab and I filter for static meshes. These are all the static meshes I have available to me, and you can see all the foliage that I want to use. I'm going to click here, shift click to the bottom so I can get all the weeds pack as well as the dried or dead leaves that I brought in, and drag it over into my foliage. The next thing I'm going to do is go over to the black alder, and I'm also going to grab our little like seedlings and saplings to get some bushes in there as well and drag that in. So now we have a whole host of different foliage that we can use throughout our scene. The first thing I want to do is unclick everything. So if you shift click on the bottom one, then shift click on the top one, and then go over here to this little check and click it, everything is now unchecked. So if I click anything, I'm not putting any foliage down. Then I want to go over here to the dead leaves that I can see right here. Shift click and click them all on. And now the dead leaves are on. So if I just click left click on the ground, the dead leaves will appear. If I shift left click, the dead leaves will disappear. By clicking shift, we enable erase mode, and you'll see it on the top left change because I'm holding shift. We're now in erase. If I let go of the shift button, we are now in the paint mode. So whenever you're painting, you can always paint and then shift click to erase. Now on the left here, you're going to see a bunch of different filters, or first we'll start from the top. We have our brush size. So that is going to change this little circle that you see appearing around my cursor. If I increase this, it is now increasing. If I decrease it, it is now decreasing. That is the size in which we're going to paint, or the area in which we're going to paint. The next is the density. If I increase this to 1 and then paint, we now have more of our mesh being painted in one single area. And if I, again, shift click, it'll erase everything. You can also change your erase density. In this particular case, I don't suggest changing it. Just keep it how it is, and it'll run off your paint density, which works fine. Next, you can go down to filters. Filters is what is going to allow you to paint things or paint foliage on objects or the ground without really having to worry about other things in your scene. For example, if I only wanted this to hit our landscape and not our static meshes, I can click here. But by doing that, it'll paint here and it won't paint here. In fact, my little bubble or cursor won't even go on to the static mesh on the corner. So everything that I'm painting right now is being painted below on our actual landscape right here instead of on top. So let me just back up to delete all that. So the next one is, if we keep going down, you can change the density of each specific object that you're painting. So say you want this one to be a higher density than this one, I can change the density right here using this number. I can also change the scale in which it's going to appear, and I can randomize it a little bit by, say, decreasing and increasing the certain scale. I can also offset the Z value. So say it's not laying perfectly on the ground, I can decrease the Z value so it lays a little further onto the ground or higher depending on how it's appearing. Right now, if I click, it looks like this is appearing pretty evenly on the ground. So I don't see too much of a need to adjust. Actually, I might need to. Let's see. Let's go over to offset and make it 1 and 1. And if I paint, you're going to now see that more is appearing than over here. So set the offset for your dead leaves to be, and then we have multiple values for this because now we're clicking on multiple ones, but I'm going to go 1 and then 1 to have the offset a little higher, which is going to sit our leaves a little higher onto our asphalt for them more, so more of them show. Okay, so now we've done that, we can get into painting. So I'm going to keep our dead leaves selected, and I'm just going to start painting them throughout our scene to kind of add them in where I feel they fit. And then if you're ever sure, or if you're not sure how it looks, you can always go back to selection mode, click on Cine Camera Actor, and pin it. So you can always use that as a good reference point. But I think it's looking pretty good already. And we don't want to go too heavy on the leaves. So I think this is where I'm going to sit. The next thing we can do is go back into the foliage mode and uncheck our foliage and go over to the top saplings and click on those. And let's just place them in the middle of our scene to kind of see what we're working with. So already density is way too high. So I'm going to shift click to get rid of it and decrease the density to 0.1. Click again, see what we're getting. Looking good, but still a little too many. So let's go to 0.05 and click again. That's looking good. Okay, so now that we have 0.05 selected, I'm going to go through and start painting our bushes in the back and front of our scene. And then if you notice your foliage is kind of dancing up and down, what's happening is the wind is being perceived incorrectly or the strength could be set too high. So to fix that, you can always do control space, enter in your content browser, and then you need to find the static meshes you chose, double click on them, double click on the material itself, and then go over to this wind section and make sure the wind is turned off so it's no longer animating. Sometimes this still doesn't work, and you would need to click 0 on the actual wind noise and wind strength to kind of shut it off. So make sure to do this with all your static meshes to avoid this glitch. Okay, so now that that is fixed, we can continue painting in our foliage on our right side as well. Okay, the next thing we can do is go into foliage, click off all of our plants, and now we can go over to the weeds and click those on. Now, same thing, I'm just gonna paint them on the ground and kind of see what we're getting. I definitely want this to be a lot thicker, so maybe let's do 0.1 and paint again on the ground. Maybe let's do 1 and paint again on the ground. That's kind of what I'm going for. So now I can shift click to erase all of that and start painting away. Again, I'm just going to make sure that we have our scene enabled so I can look at it while I'm painting to see what is in and out of scene. And then the other thing I do want to mention is we definitely want to be painting on static meshes here, so it's popping up on our meshes itself. All right, the next thing we can do is start adding in some rubble to our actual road. So to do that, I can do control space, go over to our fab library, click on static mesh, and just grab some of these little rubble pieces and drag them into our foliage. Once you do that, just make sure you click everything that you were painting before and unclick it so it won't paint. And now we can click on our rubble, and I'm just going to paint something real quick to see how it looks. That's looking good. So now I can just probably reduce this to 0.01 or 0.05 and just paint some rubble around here so it's not looking so perfectly contained in these little blocks. That way we now have just some extra kind of imperfections throughout our road as well that kind of lead up to our main piles. Perfect. So the only last thing I notice is I would kind of want something to be on our rocks throughout our scene. So what I think I'm going to do is start adding in a new plant, which is ferns. So I'm going to go over to selection mode, go over to window, go down to fab. Once I'm in fab, I'm going to go over here to Quixel and click on the Quixel library and type in ferns. And I think I'm going to go click on this one right here and add it to our project. Then I have that. I can do control space, or I can head over to the foliage, do control space, and drag and drop our ferns into our scene. Now that I have our ferns, since they're the first thing I just dragged in, they are selected. I just need to go over to the rubble, make sure that's unselected, and we are ready to go. And then since you're painting on static meshes, just make sure you're going through and checking that you painted no ferns on any leaves or trees, since they will paint on those as well. Okay, and this is what our scene is looking like now. So next thing I'm going to do is just add in some one final asset, which is our little road close sign. Looks like it's going to be gigantic, so I'm going to get out and minimize the size. Okay, so now that our please sign is in, I am noticing one issue, which is a weird flicker. So we can change this by doing Control Space to enter the content browser and going to where the material is held. Once there, I'm going to right click, create a new material. And in here, I'll just name this m_sign. I can double click it and then take these materials, drag and drop them in. And then I will zoom in and just take, this is the albedo. I'll put this into base color. This, I believe, was named the roughness, but you can always make sure it's the metallic and roughness. So roughness is going to be in the R. And then normal can go into normal. And you can apply, save, close. And then if you take this sign and drag and drop it, that is how our sign is going to be looking. So now I can go back into our scene, and this is how our scene is looking now. So the next thing I'm going to want to do is start changing around our lighting to kind of fit the way I want our scene to be perceived. So I'm going to click on the directional light. And once you click on the directional light, you'll see this right here. You can move it to adjust your light. So if I change rotation, we are now changing the way our light is going to come into our scene. So I'm just going to adjust it slightly so we have some light coming in the back. I don't know which side I want it to be on. Maybe something like this. And then the next thing you can do is go over to Environment Height Fog and scroll down and enable volumetric fog, which is going to adjust the fog greatly. And then you can change the scattering of the fog as well. You can also go back to the directional light and kind of lower the sun so it's coming more in at an angle. Let's go like this. There we go. That's looking good to me. Now I can exit out. And the next thing I'm going to want to bring into our scene is something called a post-process volume. So I'm going to go over here to the top left, click on this little box, go down to volumes, and then click on post-process volume. Now in the post-process volume, I'm going to go over here and click on extent and click on that. So what I just did with this extent means right now, if I made any changes, those changes would be held purely within this box. By clicking on this, it means that this box is not really the extent of the post process, and the entire map is now affected by the changes that would be made. So it's really just making sure that everything that you see will be affected by these changes. Now that that is done, the first thing we want to do is affect exposure. So whenever you're inside Unreal, if I'm going around, you're going to see that if I go into a dark place, like right here, the exposure will adjust so I can see what I'm looking at, which is not something that you want when you're kind of shooting your scene. You want everything to be set and at the exact same exposure level. So what this is doing is going to normalize the exposure to one single number. So to do that, I'm going to go over here to min EV100 and max EV100 and click those on. And I'm going to start with 0 and kind of adjust from there. So click both 0. And this is too dark for what I'm going for. So then I can go for -1 and -1. Let's go a little more drastic. Let's do -4 and -4, which might be a little too much. So let's settle on -3 and -3. And I think that is what we're looking for. And now if I go over to cinematics and click on our camera, that is the change it made to our scene, which I feel looks much better. Okay, so now that that is done, the next thing we can do is enter our camera sequencer and actually start animating a camera scene. So to do that, I'm going to go over here to the top left, click on this little clapperboard and click Add Level Sequence. Now this is going to pop up here. I'm going to name this LS for level sequence and just type in main, since in this case, I'll only be making one level sequence, and clicking Save. Now that you have this in front of you, let's pull it up from below. This is what you should be seeing. If you don't see it, you can always do Control Space, go over to your content folder and double click on your sequence to open it up. So now that you have the level sequence opened, the first thing we can do is go over here to Add, and then go to Actor to Sequencer and find your camera and click on it. Now that your camera is in your scene, you can add keyframes to adjust your camera. So an easy way of doing this is if you are ejected out of your camera, say you're just moving around your scene and you want to adjust where your camera is, you can quickly click this button right here that locks your view to your camera and will bring you right into controlling your camera. So the first thing I'm going to do is go down to Transform. Transform is going to adjust location, rotation, and scale. But if you just click this keyframe right here, it will now lock, or it'll log all of the changes you made to location, rotation, and scale. So if I am right here, and then let's move the playhead, and I click right here, now I go back, you're going to see that the camera is moving between the two keyframes that we made in our scene. So let me undo this. I'm going to shoot to the end of the scene and maybe start low, kind of just move forward in our scene. Maybe even look up to the right slightly. And then we can kind of scroll back. This hero shot can go a little low as well and click right there. And that is our movement. But how do we make this a little more cinematic? Well, one way is by extending it so it doesn't move so quickly. To do that, we can click minus or plus on our keyboard to zoom out. Once you've zoomed out, you can now scroll to the right, extend this red bar, and move this out. These are a count of each frame. So by extending this, you're actually extending the time in which your scene is going to be around. If you notice, there are some back frames and it's kind of, you can't move around. What you can do is actually go down here and maybe make this -50. So we're only showing -50 back frames. Then I can increase this side to 1,000. So now we're showing 1,000 front frames. And let's move this maybe over to, let's do 360. Extend it out to 360. And then by extending our Cine Camera Actor, we'll also extend the keyframe. So now the keyframe is, instead of running to 180, running to 360, which now means it's going to have a much slower, much subtler movement. The next thing that's occurring is when I click play, you're going to notice the camera starts a little slower and then gets faster as it goes. What that is called a cubic interpolation. So if I left click, drag across to highlight both keyframes, and then right click on the keyframe, you're going to see something here called key interpolation. And it's cubic smart auto, cubic auto, which is we're selected to, cubic user, cubic break, linear, and constant. These are all different cubic interpolations. Cubic auto, the best way of explaining that one is what I just said. It's going to start slow, which means it's going to go slow, get fast, and then slow again. So the middle of the scene is where the camera is going to move the fastest. What we want is a steady movement throughout. So that is, if I right click, linear. Constant will actually stop your camera from moving, which means it's just a constant no matter what, no change in the camera. Linear means the speed is going to be linear throughout. So now when I click play, the speed of the camera is not changing throughout the entire scene. Now, the next thing we're going to want to add to make this shot a little more cinematic is a little bit of shake to our camera so it doesn't just look like it's just roaming through space. To do that, we need to do Control Space, right click, and go to Blueprint Class. Once you're in Blueprint Class, you want to go down to All Classes and type in here Camera Shake Base. Now, once you see Camera Shake Base, click on it and click Accept or Select. Once it's here, you can just name this whatever you want. It will be the name that you see, so just remember it. In my case, I'm just going to name it Camera Shake. Click OK. Now, double click on it. You're going to get this grid. It's not the easiest way of using this, so just exit out. Control Space again, double click on it, and now you're just going to get the Options panel. So we can go over to the root shake pattern and switch this over to Perlin noise. Once you have it in Perlin noise, you can click down on the root shake pattern and then down on location, rotation, FOV, and timing. The first thing we want to change is timing, because if we don't adjust it, it is only going to last for the time that is currently selected. So here it is at 1, so it's only going to last for 1 second. If we switch it to 0, it'll now last infinitely. So always switch your duration over to 0 so you can adjust your camera shake within your camera sequencer. If you don't do this, it's going to be a lot more finicky. Once that's done, all you need to know is that the X, Y, and Z, and the pitch, yaw, and roll are all able to be adjusted. Now, each one has an amplitude and a frequency. The amplitude is how drastic the movement is going to be. The frequency is how often the movement occurs. If you look here at the top of each section, you have a rotation amplitude multiplier and a rotation frequency multiplier, which is usually where I like to hang out. Right now, everything is set to 1, so if you just adjust the multiplier, everything else is going to adjust accordingly. I definitely suggest you play around with these settings to kind of see how they work, but to give you an easy idea, I usually set mine at 0.25 to start for everything, and then adjust from there depending on what I need. If you want to simulate how someone moves, I would say usually the Z value is a little less than the Y value and the X value, and the pitch and yaw tend to be adjusted a little less, the roll tends to be adjusted a little less than the pitch and the yaw. But now that I've set everything to 0.25, I'm just going to click Compile, Save, and Exit out. Now to add our camera shake into our scene, what we need to do is go over to the Cine Camera Actor, click this little plus, go over to Camera Shake, and now your Blueprint class will pop up right here. So click on that, and then your yellow bar here is going to be your camera shake. So right here, since there's no yellow bar, you have no camera shake, and then your camera shake will kick in over here. To have it in your scene throughout, you can drag it across and increase it. And then you can play to see how the camera shake is looking. In our case, since it's set to 0.25, it's going to be very subtle. If you want it to be more apparent, you can always increase your settings. So just to show what that's going to look like, I'll do Control Space, double click on it, and let's maybe change our multiplier to 0.5, or our amplitude multiplier to 0.5, which means the effect will be greater, but the amount won't be. And let's just click Compile, Save, and go back in and see, which I think is looking a lot better. Okay, and now on to our next shot. So what we can do now is go over here to the clapper board, click on it one more time, and add a level sequence. This time we can name this ls underscore main 1 and save. Now that we have this shot up, we can go over here and do the same thing as before. Go to actor to sequencer and add in our Cine Camera Actor. Now that we are piloting the camera, I can move the camera all the way over here. And I want to do a scene where it's moving through and using the bokeh in the background. So I'm going to have it sit right here. Click the transform button, move it to the very end, and then shoot through probably like right here. Now I can make it linear. So again, left click, select both keyframes, right click on one of the keyframes, change it to linear. Next thing I can go down here to these numbers and type in 1000. And I'm going to draw you out to being 360 and out and out. And then the last piece to this is also going to go over to the Cine Camera Actor and add in our camera shake. And then let's see what we got. Now, to ensure that the focal length is how we want it, we can also go over here and switch this up to 1.8 aperture, and then make sure that the current focal length is on our sign. So to do that, we can go over to our camera on the right. We can go down focus settings and draw plane and click right here. And now that we used our little eyedropper to click on our sign and turn on our debug plane, it's showing you what is going to be in focus. And this is exactly what we want in focus. And that manual focus distance is going to be 2794. And if I go through, you might want it to be slightly less, which is now going to be, let's say, 2764. So let's go over here, click on the manual focus length, and to make it 2794. And then at the very end, you can go over here, click on it again, and make it 2764. So now the focus is going to adjust. So if I can turn off the plane and click play, it will pass through, but keep focus on the police sign ahead. Perfect. So now what we want to do is bring these scenes in together. So to do that, I can exit out and create another level sequence. So add level sequence. I'm going to do this underscore ls underscore intro video. So now we have our intro video. And then I can go over here to the add button and add in a shot track. Now for the shots, I can click right here and pick the shots we just created. So I'll do the ls main, and then I can click one more time and do main one. So now I can back up, click right here, and both our shots are going to go from this one and we'll shoot over to this one, which is exactly what we're looking for. So the cool thing here is this is going to allow us to use the shot tracks to adjust anything that we don't want without having to do anything in our main sequences. So now that we have this in here, say I want to cut right here, I can just move this over and cut over. That has always annoyed me that that's even a feature, but ignoring that, I can drag across to kind of cut off this ending and then bring it here. So now I can kind of cut between the two earlier, which is going to allow me to do some basic editing before I even export my video. So now that we have that, let's add in a few more shots. I think the next one can be an intro shot, possibly kind of going across the ground. So let's go over here to the clapperboard on the top left, click add level sequence. I'll name this ls underscore main 2. And under this one, I'll add in our Cine Camera Actor. Our actor is we're already piloting our camera actor. So I'll go over here and kind of do something like this. And then when it comes to the focus, we'll just have to adjust the focus here on the bottom to get a good focus for our scene. So for this, I'm going to have it sit right here and click the transform, go to the end of this, and maybe kind of go right here. And let's just see how that's going for us. That's going to go a little fast, so I can make you linear. Make you 1000 just as before. I'll probably do 420 for this one. And kind of slowly move across. It's definitely looking static. So for this, I can also do Control Space, click on our camera shake and duplicate it. And let's just name this underscore fast. And let's open it up. And I can now change it to, let's do 0.75 and 0.75, which makes it a little shakier. Compile, save. And then in here, I can go over the camera actor, go to camera shake, and do the fast version. So now it's going to be much more bumpier. Than before. And then I can, again, open up my intro video and click on the shot and add in the new shot. So now it can go from here, cut over here, and follow the ground. I might even want a soft entrance. So let me maybe see something like it's going to follow the ground. And then from here, I can kind of slim this shot out and cut over to here. Maybe if I want to start a little later into this, I can move it like this and then elongate it. So now it's going to cut from here to here. Can now cut you off and add you. And then extend you by 2000 frames and have it play all the way through. Now let's add in another shot. So I can go again over to the camera sequencer, add level sequence, ls underscore main 3. And here I'll add in our camera once more. And maybe I want this one to be kind of like an exit shot. And then we can add in maybe one more detail shot. So right about here, I can go like this and then shoot to the end and kind of just zoom all the way out. And pin it right here. This one, let's do again 1000 and go all the way over to maybe 480 for this one. Again, switch this over to linear and see how that goes. Moving a little slow. We definitely want this to be faster. So to do that, you can just speed this up. And then here, I can also go down here and maybe add a little rotation. So let's have it roll, maybe start this way. Then it's going to straighten out. But let's have it at the very end, slightly roll the other way. Lock that in. So it's going to kind of do a roll on both sides. And then I can even have it do like a fake dolly zoom. So up here on our focal length, I can set it. And then at the very end, maybe I'll have it start zooming in right about here. So set it again, then zoom in. We're just going to compress our image. And then these two can be linear. So now when I play it, it's going to be backing up and slowly start compressing our image. Just slightly. You can also speed this entire thing up. Let's go back. Push them both back. Then move you as well. Drop you. And then now when we go back over to our intro video main, open level sequence, go to our little plus sign and add in our third one. It'll go through and kind of shoot out the back end. Zoom in, and that'll be the end of our scene. I actually think this last bit could last a little longer, so maybe I can just increase this part slightly. Now if I go over to the intro video, open it up, I can now have a little more at the end there. Like that. And like that. Okay, perfect. So now let's add one more detail shot in between this. So to do that, we can, again, go up here to the clapperboard, click add level sequence. I'll name this ls underscore main 4, which is going to give us a total of 5 scenes now. Add in our camera. And again, we are already piloting the camera once we add it in. So now let's try and find maybe we have our pile. Kind of just panning across. We can maybe even increase our focal length as well to 35. And just have it pan. I can even decrease this to 1.8. So we have our aperture 1.8, our focal length at 35. I will set our transform, go over to the end, shoot this way, click the transform. This time I'll just do 500. This is going to be a little shorter of a scene, so let's just hit 330. Switch it over to linear, and let's see what we have. Okay. I also think I can go over here and add in our fast camera shake. I think this one maybe can be slow then. Let's add in our slow camera shake. Yes, that's more subtle. And then I think it was 1, which goes to the car. I think the car could probably be fast instead. Switch you over to fast, see what we get here. Yeah, I think fast works better for this shot. So now when we go over to intro, again, click the plus, add in the most recent shot. This will be our ending shot. And now we have 5 shots we can play around with to kind of help design our scene. So there's one. Let me start it off maybe with this shot. So kind of show the scene from here. So we're showing our scene. Then we're going to shoot over to a detailed shot. And then from the detailed shot, we can shoot over maybe we'll just start right away here. And then end here. So let's see how this looks. I think we can go maybe U2 back to back. So it's looking rough going through here. Then we kind of show our tree scene of the lights and then end like this going through and cut. Okay, perfect. So we have our shots. Now, the last thing I'm going to do is just go through and make sure that everything throughout our scene is designed with the shots in mind. I want to make sure that everything that the shots show are designed well and look good for the scene. So that means I might be adding in some new static meshes, moving around, erasing, adjusting where it needs to be adjusted to make sure that the scene is looking good. I'm not going to be showing this step by step since everything I've taught you so far is what I'm going to be using to adjust throughout our scene. However, I will be showing a fast paced version of me going through and finalizing the scene, and then we can jump into the export before we kick out our finished scene. Okay, perfect. So now that that is all finished, the last thing we need to do is just render out our scene. Now to do that, the first thing you need to do is enable movie render queue. So you can do that by going over to edit, clicking on plugins and typing in movie render. And you're going to see this movie render queue pop up. Make sure to click this little check mark, and on the very bottom right, you're going to see a restart button. Restart your engine and it'll be enabled. Once you've restarted your engine, make sure by clicking these three dots that movie render queue is selected. Once it is, you can click on the clapperboard, and this is the menu that is going to pop up. The first thing we want to click on is unsaved config. Now, unsaved config is how we're going to configure our render so we get the most value and the most cinematic export possible without really bogging down your computer. So to do that, the first thing we're going to need to do is increase the bit depth of our export. So to do that, we need to bring in a .exr, which is 16-bit. So we can get rid of our JPEG and just keep our .exr. After that, we can bring in anti-aliasing, game overrides, and that is everything. So the .exr, again, is going to increase our bit depth, which means we're going to get the most information in our export possible. So when you bring into our editing software, you have a lot of control over the color. Next is anti-aliasing. Spatial sample count is going to give you a beautiful, crisp, lacking in motion blur image. This is very good for, say, architectural renderings and things like that. When it comes to more cinematic exports, temporal spatial count or temporal sample count tends to be the better pick. So in this case, I'll keep this at 1 and I'll make the temporal sample count 9. And then for override anti-aliasing, I'll just click. Next is game overrides. You don't need to make any changes here, but by adding it into your scene, it is basically maxing out all your settings. So it's a good thing to include because it ensures you're using the highest quality of everything possible within your scene. Next is output. Output directory is where it is going to output. You can click on this to pick the exact folder you want to output. So for me, I will just pick mine really quick. After that, we have our file name format. I usually don't make any changes here because I like the file format that is already selected. And then after that, you can also switch out your output resolution for any other output resolution if you wish. In my particular case, Full HD is perfect. After that, you just click accept and then go down to the bottom right and click render local. Once you click that, you're going to see this menu pop up, which is showing you your render preview after you compile all your shaders. Awesome. Well, I hope you all like this tutorial. I tried to put as much value in it as I possibly could. So hopefully if you're starting out using Unreal Engine, this gave you a really good start to kind of pick up any other tutorials you want to learn and understand how to use Unreal Engine and how to create what you want to create. So per usual, please like and subscribe. It helps me out a ton. And I'll see you guys on the next one.